Welcome to the Daily Drop, SHW Offroad, hosted by yours truly, Jake Tillman. I do sales and marketing for SHW Offroad. If you've called us or bought from us, you've probably spoken to me. And if we haven't spoken yet, call me. Love to talk gear, love to talk off-road, vehicles, stuff like that. So SHW Offroad we are the leading manufacturer in the USA on vehicle storage solutions. And every day we bring knowledge drops all about vehicle-based adventure travel. And today, if you watched my video yesterday, you know we're going to talk about fuel range. Fuel range is critical, and here's why. Responsible recreationalists carry backups of critical equipment, no matter what you're doing. That being said, not everyone needs to carry extra fuel. So we're going to dive in. If you run out of fuel, you can't go anywhere, right? That's why it's critical. But we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about why maybe you should carry some extra fuel on your next trip. This might seem really rudimentary to some of you, but hang in there. I think I have some stuff maybe you haven't considered before, even if you've been doing this a while. So we're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about how to carry it. I think that conversation is going to be centered on jerry cans versus auxiliary like fuel tanks that are permanently mounted and stuff. So without further ado, let's dive in. Number one, range. A lot of places in the US, this isn't a huge factor, but there are places that you need to worry about fuel range in the US. And there are definitely places you need to worry about it once you get out of the US. Whether it's into Canada, going up into Alaska, or heading south into Central America or South America. There are places that you need to consider the range of your vehicle pretty heavily. And we're going to kind of scope in or center around, off-road situations, not, a ton of highway stuff, even though that also plays a factor, right? There are stretches of highway, even in the US, where you go 100 miles without gas. That might be a hyperbole, but I'm pretty sure that's true. Regardless, fuel is important. Okay, extra fuel is really, really important. I guess one case study would be the Maze District. If you've ever been out to Utah, Canyonlands and stuff, there is a segment that is really, really, really remote called the Maze District. And you can go 110 miles without seeing gas. It's depending on how far into the maze you go. Now, some vehicles, it doesn't matter. If you're driving a cross trek and you're driving dirt and gravel roads and your fuel range is 400 miles, probably don't ever have to carry extra fuel. But if you're driving a loaded SUV, you're in low range a lot, you're crawling, you're going to get 4, 3, even 2 miles per gallon. And your fuel range is going to tank, 100 miles in some situations, 150. If you've got like an old 80 series or something like that, it's going to be even worse. So fuel range can be critical. Running out of fuel means you can't go anywhere. Your vehicle won't move, and you could be a lot of miles away with no cell service from civilization. So that's the big thing is range from a safety standpoint of why you should carry fuel. And really, that I think the topic ends there for the most part, as far as safety. But there are other things like saving on fuel costs or just making your life easier on a trip. So saving on fuel, if you can plan your route or know what's ahead, there are certain places that you'll know or find out that gas is just atrociously expensive. And if you can load up on fuel somewhere where that's not the case, travel to where it is the case, and then come back and have spare fuel, you could save yourself a lot of money, a ton of money, especially as you get into Alaska and stuff in Canada. If you plan your trip out right, you can save yourself a lot of money. So there's some savings involved. So hopefully I've convinced you maybe why it, or helped you understand if you're someone that needs to carry extra fuel. But a whole nother part of the equation is how you carry it. In my mind, there are two big or major options to do that. You can do external containers, jerry cans that are temporarily mounted, or you can do ox fuel tanks, which usually are integrated into the vehicle and they're permanently mounted and stuff. I use jerry cans. A lot of people do. And we're going to dive into the reason why a lot of people do so. And then we're going to talk about some of the advantages of maybe an ox fuel tank over that and vice versa. So let's dive right in. Most people that carry jerry cans, there's a few different kind of form factors when it comes to jerry cans, right? You have these traditional jerry cans, NATO, Scepter, or what have you, Wavian, tons and tons of cans. Side note, if you're gonna buy a jerry can like this, like one of these metal ones, buy a good one. Usually, like buy a brand you can trust or you see a lot of. These things can and will leak, and they can be messy. And the better ones usually do a better job. So you get what you pay for when it comes to jerry cans. Buy a good one. Okay, buy a good one. Like I said, Wavian makes some good ones. They're highly renowned. NATO, there's lots of them. So this is one style of jerry cans. You can also buy them. There's a company out there called Roto Packs that are some kind of synthetic. I don't know if they're plastic or what have you, but different form factor, right? They're flatter, and they're trying to, I think, make jerry cans easier to mount and just kind of more convenient in general. So there are a few different kinds of jerry cans out there, but the pros to all of them are kind of the same, really, no matter their form factor. The first on my list is weight. A jerry can is almost always temporarily mounted on a vehicle. If we look at the traditional jerry can design, they're usually mounted like this in a tray of some sort or on a roof rack, which I don't recommend, but they're temporarily mounted. What that means is they can be removed. What that means is you can remove weight when you need to, right? So let's say you're bogged down in sand and you've got 15, 20 gallons of fuel or let's say you're bogged down in mud and you've got tons of extra fuel because you're up on the Mackenzie Trail in Alaska. Like, being able to remove 100 pounds of fluids can make a difference, right? So it's removable weight. You're flexible in where you put that weight. You can put it like in some of these pictures, you can put it on a swing out. You can throw it on a roof rack. Again, I don't really recommend it. You can put it in the center of a vehicle. So I might get flack for this, and some people will strongly disagree with me, but a good jerry can, I guess I shouldn't even be an advocate for this, but jerry cans in the vehicle, some people do it. I'll just keep it at that. Some people put it in the vehicle, and there's great reasons why, as far as center of gravity and weight distribution and stuff like that, right? So the point being, there are a lot of places you can put a jerry can, and it's removable. You can move it. So that is a big pro, number one. Number two, they're flexible. Like I said, you can get them in these different form factors and different sizes, and you can swap them in and out. You can share them across vehicles. It's much easier to anyway than say like an ox fuel tank. So it has that going for them. They're also cheap, relatively. Good jerry cans aren't super cheap, but they are way less expensive than trying to integrate a fuel tank into your vehicle or your truck. Those are the pros of jerry cans. Ox fuel tanks. Before we jump into the pros of them, two things up front. They're really expensive to install. Okay. Well, I shouldn't say really. They're not always really expensive to install. I'll keep it that. But a lot of them are. It's a much higher investment than a couple jerry cans. And it's permanent. Usually it's a permanent mount, and that means it's permanent weight, which means you're stuck with it and whatever's inside of it, whether you got it full or not. Some of the pros, though, to ox fuel tanks, they're usually clean. You do not have to since the tank is mounted to the underside of the truck, or maybe you got a fuel cell in the bed or what have you, since it is directly tied in to your vehicle, you don't have to remove it from the mount and pour it into your tank, which leaves all kinds of opportunities or presents all kinds of opportunities to spill gas on you, your clothes, your truck. It can be messy. That's not a problem with an aux fuel tank or a fuel cell. A lot of them, you flip a button and and you have a transfer pump and it transfers it to your other tank, or another way to just get gas to your engine without having to do it by hand. Which leads to the second pro of these, and that means you can refuel essentially, or you have another fuel source without having to stop. It's good for people that are trying to put a lot of miles down, trying to get somewhere on the road, and they don't want to stop. Usually I have to go to the bathroom before I run out of fuel in my tank, or my wife's ready to get out of the car, but out of the truck. But there is an advantage in not having to stop to fill up your tank with jerry cans. Last, and a big one for aux fuel tanks, a big pro to them is your weight's low. Albeit it's not a great place. It's usually behind the rear axle. And most, like if you look at this 100 series I've got pulled up, all these fuel tanks are mounted at the rear, which I think is where usually the spare is located. Could be wrong, but usually the spare is there, and instead they've got an aux fuel tank. Your weight's, you got a lot of weight, and it's at the furthest end of the vehicle, right? You got a lot of leverage weight behind the axle, but it's low, and it's much better than a bunch of jerry cans on a roof rack or even on a swing out. If you've got 4 or 5 jerry cans, you're leveraging it even further back and higher. Okay, so the nice thing about fuel tanks, especially if you can get them along the middle rail of your frame, they're low and they distribute weight really well. Oh, here's one. It looks like this fuel cell right here. They've got it between their drive shaft and their frame and towards the center of the vehicle, if I'm not mistaken. So that is a great place for an aux fuel tank, or water. Some people put water down there too. So those are the pros and cons, comparing them to each other. For most people, jerry cans are enough. That's all you need. But also, just taking it back to where we started, most people need to carry extra fuel. Obviously, it's not everyone, but I encourage you on some of that doesn't mean you need to carry extra fuel all the time, right? Like, you don't have to be the person going to the mall with 5 jerry cans on your roof rack. But if you know you're going on a remote trip where you're going to be miles and miles from civilization and maybe you're alone, carry extra fuel. Next time, that's all I got on gas, on fuel. Hope you learned something today. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about fluids in general. Going to dispel some of the myths of what fluids you should carry, and I'm going to talk about how you should carry them. So come learn with me tomorrow. As always, call with any questions. SHWOffroad.com has all my contact info. We'll definitely have a dialogue. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe so you're notified every day when we get these. Is a much better way to spend your time than the alternatives that we like to partake in when we have free time on our hands as far as social media and stuff. So tune in. See you tomorrow.